I'm Jules Feiffer. I'm a cartoonist, I'm an author, I'm an illustrator, and more than anything else, I'm a father to Kate Feiffer over here.
And I'm Kate Feiffer, daughter of Jules Feiffer and author of picture books and chapter books for children.
The least pleasure I've had in my work was when I was starting out and actually making money for clients and doing advertising and making corrections and doing this and doing that, and every time I take a piece of work in, they change it completely. And one day, after about a year or so of this, I found myself waking up with a stomach ache every day with the notion that I had to do some cartooning today. And I said, this is insane. All my life I've wanted to be a cartoonist because it was what I loved. And now I hate it because of what I'm assigned to do. And then I began to think, I have to reclaim my amateur credentials. I can't be a professional in this business. I just have to have a good time. And if I can't have a good time, I just won't do it. So the answer to what I like most is what I'm playing at the moment. And it's all become, over the years, increasingly childlike as a form of play to me. I just play at, I mean, it's hard play, and it's difficult play, and it's play of failure often. But I know it's going to work out when I fail, and because it's the game I'm doing, and it's a game I'm having with myself, and hopefully with readers and viewers and whoever the end result will be aimed at. But but all of it I love, and all of it I love as I'm doing it. I think what has to be stated and overstated is it's quite lucky when you end up doing work that you love, and that it's also challenging, and that has its it's more than a share of frustration and failure, and yet it feeds you, and then there's the feedback, the appreciation of the people who respond to it, which is incalculable and and life-sustaining. I mean, it's wonderful to do work which turns out, by the evidence of others and testimony of others, to be appreciated and valuable and to be remembered. I mean, you don't. It doesn't get better than that.
It's also pretty great to be in a room reading to a group of kids and hearing uproarious laughter. I mean, that's not bad. That type of appreciation goes pretty far. So that's.
There are worse ways to almost make a living. And one of the great joys is, having done this on my own or with, a few others who were friends or who turned out to be friends afterwards, to collaborating with my daughter Kate has turned out to be such a joy and such a surprise because
gift.
Who expected it? And as she said, it's a special relationship because we are so geared toward each other, and very little has to be said, and very little has to be consulted about, except we're always consulting with each other, and whether we're talking directly or not, because my job is to service her machine. I mean, that this is her book, and I am there to supplement it and make it work to the best way I know how. And that means to get inside the characters and get inside the ideas and to make the reader see that all of this is one rather than pictures and text, as I've said before.
And it's a great gift for me to see the words come to life drawn by him, so they're going to be beautiful. And I always, as I said, I visualize my books, even the ones that he does, while I'm writing them, yet what he comes up with is different and even better than I self-visualized, and I feel very lucky. It's been extraordinary.
Well, I'm truly, in terms of my work, a creature of the times I live in, the culture I live in, the politics I live in, a child of the Depression, a child of rising anti-Semitism in Europe and fervent anti-Semitism in the United States at the same time, where first-generation Jewish boys, through it all wanting not really to be Jewish so much as to be like them, the very people who didn't like them, wanting to be big and blonde and muscular, and out of that the Superman fantasy came, written by two nerdy Jewish boys. wanting to assimilate, wanting to be part of that game and part of that show. And the American comic strip was very much culturally a big deal and part of that show in the 1930s and 1940s. And of course, that was what I was passionate about and wanted to throw myself into. This was a form at the time that a lot of young Jewish kids fell in love with and saw as their way into the deal, into the American collective, where you would go from nowhere, from rags to riches, and be celebrated and be loved and make a lot of money, and most importantly for young nerdy Jewish boys, meet girls who would otherwise never look at you. I don't think comics the newspaper comic strip barely exists anymore, and God knows that 82 going in 83, I can hardly speak for a younger generation, but it's if comics at all have a reality for any young people, it's the alternative comics that come out in as graphic novels in some cases, and which expands the imagination and expands the use of the confessional, sometimes to sorry extent, and other times quite beautifully. But it's a whole different form. But it's no way any longer from rags to riches, because nobody makes money at the amount of work put into these graphic novels. And I'm working on one right now. It takes forever to get it all done, and the financial results are, barely enough to keep you above the poverty level. But it's still a work of love, and that's what these people are in it for. It's storytelling. It's all storytelling, and though it's pictures, and the pictures are essential. Without a story being behind the pictures, which meaning relationships, and what people say that they mean and what people say that they don't mean, and how to get both across. That's what makes it all interesting, and that's what makes it all exciting, to try to figure out ways of getting across to an audience, to readers, subtly, what is going on to a point where they may not even be aware of what you're doing. I've always thought of what I do as a form of a magic act, sleight of hand, that I'm busy doing my work over here in the corner, doing this over there, and if I'm lucky, you will never be aware of it. You will just be aware of the effect.
Also, in terms of growing up with a visual background, I mean, that was my professional life, but just growing up the daughter of a cartoonist and having that as my foundation, and having my father always at the drawing table drawing, and me often on his lap as a young child drawing, I think that probably lent a lot to the fact that I think very visually.
Well, and going back to that, when she was young, she would sit on my lap and we would do a comic strip together where I would do a panel and write the dialogue, and then she would draw a panel and dictate the dialogue to me, and I would write her dialogue, and we'd go, alternate panels.
That was fun.
I initially found the idea of ever doing children's books ridiculous. After illustrating the Phantom Tollbooth, which was 50 years ago, I never thought I would do another one. It's not what I did. Norton just happened to be my roommate. We were friends. It was a logical outgrowth of that relationship. But this was the 1950s. It was the early 60s, the middle of the Cold War years. And my passionate aim was overthrowing the government and through satire, which is not easy to do, but I thought I was up to it. And I didn't want the notion of writing for children. Didn't seem to make any sense to me. I didn't have children. I didn't particularly like children. And then what happened is that I fell in love with her mother, and she came along, and then two other children came along. And what happens is that your lack of interest and lack of caring about children switches like that. And suddenly it was as much fun as anything I could imagine. And thinking about kids and why they were different from us and how they were the same, and what they liked and what they didn't like, and trying to figure out their thought process, which is impossible. And all of it became of interest to me when 20 years earlier it seemed deadly dull. the books for children, like the cartoons, seem to start out, as so most of what I do, with an opening sentence the way improvisational actors do. There's an opening line, and often you don't know where that line comes from. And you probably do it the same way, where something comes out of your mouth, except it's not out of your mouth because it's written down. But it's the same thing. And it's down there, and then you have to follow it up with something. And just as on stage one actor follows with another and they go back and forth, here you are both actors, and you go back and forth with yourself. And if you're lucky, it develops into something, and you get on a roll, and you're going.
That's the best part, the opening line. I mean, that's the most fun, when you have the great opening line, and then what comes after it, and then what comes after it, and that's usually then when I get stuck.
Well, but in a sense, it gets best when you stop writing it, when it's writing you,
Right.
when it takes over, whatever this process is.
But don't you find that it usually comes to you, that
Yes.
it starts without you, and then
Yeah.
somewhere along the line you
Yes.
interject yourself, and that's when it gets challenging before the story takes over again, if it does.
And when it's in your head, it's least likely to work. It's when it's simply challenging you and moving you, and in a sense you're taking dictation from whatever it is that is making you do this. And then there's the process where you do use this, which is the editing, the cleaning it up, and the making it work.
I don't seem to leave home for my ideas. I mean, honestly, my first book, which was called Double Pink, was inspired by my daughter and her insatiable devotion to this color pink, which came seemingly out of nowhere, because I was one of those gender-neutral parents who, if anything, erred on the side of blue and green, and she had no pink in her life until she self-discovered it and then became quite passionate about it. So my ideas stem from,
To this day.
to this day, at the age of 13, she still loves this color. Yeah.
At 50, you can see. It might seem a little cute by then, but
So I'm really inspired what seems to be around me. In my second book, Henry the Dog with No Tail, I have a dog. His name's Henry. He has no tail. It's thinking about what's going on around me and it grows from that and from my thoughts around, is this color going to consume our lives? What will happen when pink takes over our lives? That tends to be where my starting point.
it was the same thing that was true of the most successful of the books that I've written, Bark George. That Bark George was a bedtime story for my daughter Julie when she was about 2 years old. And as I lay on the bottom the bottom part of the bed, the loft bed, bunk, thank you. You're a writer. I just improvised this story. I had no where it was going, and as it came to me, I realized this was a kid's book and a good one, and so I made notes on it. But once I had the notes, I realized that there was no pictures here. It was just about a dog saying meow and a dog saying quack and a dog saying oink, but there was no visual interest anywhere. It was really a radio show. So the challenge was, how do I make this work? How do I play this? And then I remembered going back to the great comic strip Pogo. And Walt Kelly had a character called Hound Dog in it. And Hound Dog was wonderful because of his overacting and his emoting and all of that. And then I thought, well, the book is really the mother's book. That it's a book of reaction. That we have to see, for the reader, we have to see how the mother responds to George's going meow and doing all of these things, which on his part are very passive. So she has to be the drama here. And her overacting gets us through the early stages of the book until we get to the second part, which is the vet, who does his own overacting, and then we're on our way. So you have to figure out what the problems are, and after you oive a while, you have to figure out a solution, and it's always there somewhere. I did a book about Maddie, my granddaughter, who they happen to have a relationship as mother. And it was based on an incident I saw when we were on a family vacation where Maddie was in a swimming pool. She was a baby, she was about 2, with her father, who's a big, muscular guy. And I mean, he's immense, and she was nothing. And she was ordering him around in the pool, telling him where to stand in order to climb him. You know, and he would put out his hand, and she's spending this time climbing him, but giving him instructions all the time. And I thought, as I sat there watching them, grinning from ear to ear, that this is a book. And it became a book called The Daddy Mountain, which is a How to Climb Your Father book. Mm-hmm. And with Maddie as the character, and Chris, her husband, as you know, who comes in at the end, and you see him. Mm-hmm. But when I went home and showed the color proof, the first color proofs to my family, there was Julie, who looked at the book very grimly, and she said,
his youngest daughter.
Julie is my adopted daughter, and what is she? How many years older is she?
Then Maddie, she's three and a half years older
Okay.
than my daughter.
And she just very quiet through the whole thing, and she said, finally, you did a book about her before you did a book about me. So after the knife was taken out, I said to her, really immediately, Julie, I apologize, and the next book I do will be about you. And I had begun work on the memoir, which I stopped. And the next day I said, I don't have any ideas for a book. Do you have any ideas? And she said, Julie loved animals, and she had some pets, and she was after me to get a dog, which I refused to do because I knew who would take care of that dog. And she said, how about a girl with a zoo in her room? Now, if she said, how about a girl who loves pets, it would have gone nowhere. But a zoo in the room, there was the whole book. And the book from the beginning was going to be called A Room with a Zoo. And I thought of it as a picture book. And I'd write it in 2 or 3 days. And it would be fun to draw. And as I started writing it, I decided it should be written in Julie's voice. So I started in the first person. And Julie's voice said to me after the first hour, saying, I'm sorry, but this is going to be a novel. Because I talk too much. and
Because that is an idea. That could have been a picture book.
Yeah,
It could have
yeah.
been a very cute picture book.
But once I put it in the first person in her voice, that dictated what the book had to be, and that's what it was. And I had as much fun working on it as I ever did on anything trying to sound like her and bring our family into it, including
We're in
Kate
it.
and
Maddie's in it.
and Maddie and Chris.
I think we have very similar sensibilities. So it's been a very easy working relationship. It's been, we've never had a fight over anything we've done in any of the books. There's never been a disagreement about, I mean, he's given me suggestions on the text, which I either take or don't, and don't tell him if I don't. And with the illustrations, for the first 2 books we did together, he was on Martha's Vineyard where I live when he did them, and I would come over and see them pretty much every day, and it was great to see the book evolve day by day. And for this book, My Side of the Car, and our new book, which comes out in March, I did not see those. I did not see those illustrations as he did them, and it was a thrill to see them. But it's been a very easy working relationship. We haven't had any disagreements at all until now.
I found My Side of the Car a difficult book to do, and the style I drew it in. I had never done a book quite like that with pencil and colored washes. Halfway through, I thought was the wrong style, and I thought the book was not going to work. I was quite scared that the illustrations were going to be neither this way or that way, and that they'd be acceptable on you, but that they'd really be good. And I had no idea how well the book worked until I got the first color proofs, and I was astonished. It looked like the work of someone else. I mean, that it was so different from my fears and my apprehensions that I couldn't imagine what had happened to these drawings since I had screwed them up.
But they were very much your drawings. I mean,
Yes,
they're very
yes.
clearly yours. But it's been great. We did a book called Witch Puppy together, which had the illustrations had to be done in less than 3 weeks. And he came up to Martha's Vineyard to do those illustrations. And
in January.
In January, and stayed in his summer house, which is not really heated.
Barely heated.
And bundled up in sweaters and blankets and hats. He cranked out this gorgeous book.
Well, I had the oven on the way we used to live during the Depression to heat up the house. So it brought back the good old days.
Yes, and I would come over on the pretense to see the illustrations, but really just making sure that
Thought I was alive.
he didn't have carbon monoxide poisoning. Yes.
It's staged, but it may even be more movies, because in a way, these picture books are storyboards. And before you do the book, you take the text, whether it's by me or by Kate or someone else I'm working with, and it's words on paper, and it's my job to break it down into pages, where on each page there's some text and an illustration, and decide what tells the best story, what pushes the story forward, what creates the most momentum, where does it have to pause, where are the stops, where does it build up again, where do you want the reader to go fast, when do you want the reader to go slow. So there's immense, as I say, like a film director, you spend a lot of time before you even worry about what the drawing is going to look like finished. You've got a little rough scribble of what it should be as a layout. But after that, you try to think, what helps the story? And something can be really a great drawing, and if it doesn't help the story, it has to go out.
And for me as a writer, I have a background as a television news producer where you write to the picture. And I think that influenced my style a lot, because when I write children's books, I am writing to the picture. I'm visualizing the book as I write it. Obviously, it's in my style of drawing, which is different than it will look, but I'm writing as I'm seeing it. And in a certain way, the pictures that I'm visualizing are leading the story. And I think that comes from this television background.
And in my side of the car, when Kate first showed me the book, the text, I thought it was wonderful. I loved it. It was clear that I had to do it. But the question was, how do you do a book that takes place inside a car? Where are the pictures going to be? And there are two things that happen with that sort of challenge. It's both daunting and frightening, and it's also something that quite excites you, because you know that there's got to be an answer here, and you just have to figure it out, and it will lead to something very exciting.
I'm always surprised when you say this, when you tell the story, because I totally visualized it while I was writing it.
So why don't you illustrate your own book?
Because I have you around.
I'm not sure I think ever in terms of dissonance, but I do think in terms of subtext. After all, almost everything I learned about writing a play came out of reading Chekhov over and over and over again. And where the things on the surface or the things that are there hide something that else is going on. And the fun, the great fun, is in the counterpoint between what the text has to say and the illustration which comments on it or elucidates. If it just literally executes the words, it's less fun. It doesn't mean that it can't work, but it lacks the kind of life. For a page to have energy, there has to be a dance between the text and the art.
They need to be woven together. You can't imagine a successful children's book, picture book, is when you can't imagine a set of different pictures with these words. When the art is so integral to the words that they seem like they were, born together. And I think that's the sign of a truly successful children's book, when they sort of just blend as one.
There are two narratives going on in the story, but the narratives cannot be in combat with each other. There are too many gorgeously illustrated children's books, which when you look at them, you see that the art is its own excuse for being, that the illustrator really had no particular interest in the text except in showing off how good I am. And look at this, doesn't this wow you? And as good as that art is, it's boring. And it's essentially a failure. There has to be a collaboration between what you read and what you see, and the two of them. And I know this in particular because my background is comic strips. It's words and pictures. The words and pictures, the dialogue in comic strips, or the text in a children's book, and the drawing that accompanies it, make one thing so that as a reader, whether you're a kid or a grown-up, your mind doesn't separate one from the other. They blend together, and you can't think of them separately. I think in Milo's case, the drawing of Milo in the Phantom Tollbooth, I think because Milo was the lead character and around everything it all revolves, I think he was the easiest to do. He was the centerpiece, and he was, in a sense, the middleman, the MC for all of the insanity that takes place in the book, so that every other character was more complicated and demanded more thought, but Milo, in a sense, was a little more than Ed Sullivan, pointing to all of the people, while the book was happening around him and about his thought processes. What was really interesting was the results of his imagining all of these things going on. And so the humbug was a lot more difficult to come up with, and Talk the Dog, and the various witches and the various this or that. But when I recently was on a panel with Norton about the book, and I looked at the drawings and began to wonder for the first time in years why I decided to put Milo in a black T-shirt, or sweater, and instead of just an ordinary shirt. And I think I just wanted to spice up the page with black and have an excuse for it. But it seemed an unlikely form of dress for a kid who was that uncertain about everything. And I didn't know why I did that, and I'm not sure I would do that again, but it worked. I have a particular love for The Man in the Ceiling as a novel. I also love A Barrel of Laughs, A Veil of Tears, which was a novel. And I think maybe my secret favorite, not so secret, is among the picture books, because it didn't sell all that well, and I thought was one of the most profound, is By the Side of the Road, about a father who throws his kid out of the car because he's making a fuss. And he says, if you don't learn your lesson, you're going to have to stay by the side of the road. And he never learns his lesson and spends the rest of his life by the side of the road. How can you not love a book like that?
And it's kind of got a cult following.
Yes.
People who have it and know it really, really love it. Like, I've seen people come up to him at book signings with, like, would you sign my side of the road, please? And so it has a cult following.
It's a noir children's book.
But I imagine parents probably had some issues with it. I can imagine some
parents.
Well, but was that sort of your memoir before your memoir? But this, was that sort of what you?
Well, it's about upending authority in the home. Where the
or just wishful thinking. Only if they had left me on the side of the road.
And authority and who's got control is, of course, the underground message in so much of my work, and maybe all of my work.
Honestly, I can say I don't have one that's quasi-true, but would feel far too guilty, this is weird, to say if I did have a favorite one, because I wouldn't want to offend anyone, including the book, the illustrator.
No, you don't want to hurt the characters in your book.
I just, you get asked that question every school visit you do, and it's a question that I'm not going to answer.
I have a favorite of hers that I've illustrated, because I was the wrong illustrator for it, and it turned out, and I was very worried because I so loved the text, which she did not, that I didn't want to screw it up. I found, when I was looking through some old work of mine, I found a typed manuscript, and I don't type, so I knew it had to be Kate or no one else. And it was an early story she wrote before she was writing children's books. And it was about a baby who would refuse to go to sleep. And I didn't remember reading it. I vaguely remembered something about it. But I thought it was absolutely charming and workable. And I didn't say a word to Kate about it, but I worked it into a 32-page dummy, rough book. I mailed it to her, with her manuscript, and she was astonished. She had forgotten it too. On the basis of that, we sent it to her editor at Simon & Schuster, Paula Wiseman, who loved it. And I said to Paula, this is too sweet and innocent a book for someone as mean and nasty for me to do. So if you really think somebody else should do it, I'm not going to feel bad about it. But she asked me to do it, and I did it, and because it's so counter to my normal approach, I think it's my favorite of all the books I've done with you.
My Side of the Car is based on real life events that occurred with us when I was a child, and we were on a trip that I was really, really excited about, to a wildlife sanctuary in Martha's Vineyard, and just so happy about this outing with my dad. And we're driving there, and we're about halfway there, and he says to me, "We can't go. It's raining." And
she knew I was lying.
This isn't possible. And I look out my window, and I knew it couldn't be raining because we're going to this wildlife sanctuary, and we've been waiting to go on this trip, and it's finally our day to go, and it wasn't possible that it was raining. And so I look out my window, and lo and behold, I was right. It wasn't raining. So I said to him, "It's not raining on my side of the car." And then he continued to drive and insist that it was raining, and I continued to look out my window.
And it became part of a game back and forth, so that, while she invested a lot in it not being raining, it was also, we were both playing until, and since I have no memory of how it ended. And I don't think you do
neither of
either.
us can remember if we ended up going or not. But for years and years, decades after this event, when we had a friendly disagreement, if there was something that we just couldn't come to terms on, it would inevitably end with me saying, "Well, it's not raining on my side of the car."
Well, remember, maybe not. Remember, the picture is she's getting soaked. She's getting soaked as she stands there.
No,
And
she wants to help out her dad.
And so she's saying, "Well, I don't want you to get wet." She is just a mess.
But she, as the text reveals, doesn't want her dad to get wet. It's not my fault that you made her soaking wet.
It's not the first child who's lied to her father.
So would you like us to read this? Can you read your part and I'll read my part?
Oh, we can try.
Okay. I'm Kate Pfeiffer, the author of My Side of the Car. And
whoever I am,
my dad and I are going to the zoo. We've tried to go to the zoo before, but we never get there. Something always happens. One day, when we were supposed to go to the zoo, my mom tripped over a toy fire engine. So we went to the hospital instead of the zoo. Another day, when we were supposed to go to the zoo, my dog Pasha got lost. So we spent the day looking for him instead of going to the zoo. Another day, when we were supposed to go to the zoo, my grandparents showed up for a surprise visit, and they don't like the zoo. So we went to the museum instead of the zoo. Today, we're finally going to the zoo. Nothing can stop us, not a broken foot, or a lost dog, or a surprise visit, not even an escaped tiger. Because if we don't go to the zoo today, I don't think we will ever get there. The monkeys and giraffes and elephants and polar bears have waited a long time to see us. We're finally on our way. We're having the best time ever.
Until my dad says to me, "Sadie, it's raining."
I look out my window and say to him, "No, it's not."
Then he says it again, "Sadie, it's raining. We can't go to the zoo."
So I look out my window again and say, "It's not raining on my side of the car."
My dad keeps driving. After a few minutes, he says, "Sadie, is it raining on your side of the car yet?"
I look out my window and the sun is shining on my side of the car. People are putting on their sunglasses and heading to zoos all over the world on my side of the car.
My dad keeps driving. After he drives a little longer, he says, "Sadie, it's pouring on my side of the car. I think by now it must be at least drizzling on your side of the car."
So I look out my window again. One drop has fallen on my side of the car. It might not even be a whole drop. It looks more like half a drop. The huge field of sunflowers we're driving by won't even notice half a drop. So I tell him it's not raining on my side of the car. People on my side of the car are watering their lawns.
After we pass 2 stop signs and drive up a big hill, my dad says, "Sadie, what about now? It's raining so hard on my side of the car that the windshield wipers are exhausted. Is it even sprinkling on your side of the car yet?"
The rain from his side of the car made a puddle that splashed my side of the car, so I can't see all the people who I know are there walking their dogs or riding their bikes or eating ice cream. I tell him, nope, it's still not raining on my side of the car. He keeps driving.
The roads on his side of the car look more like rivers than roads, so we decided to look for roads on my side of the car because the zoo is on my side of the car. After an extra long trip, we finally get to the zoo. "We're here," says my dad.
I get out and walk over to his side of the car.
"What do you think?" he asks.
I think that it's raining really hard on your side of the car, and I don't want you to get wet, I say. We should come back to the zoo another day.
"Okay," says my dad, "so do I."
After a big turn in a hill and some boring, just plain roads, my dad says,
"Sadie, I was wondering if it's raining on your side of the car because it stopped raining on my side of the car."
off we go. We're going to the zoo. At last.
I'd be loath to say that a New York Times writer stole this idea from me. But at the epigraph, at the beginning of Backing Into Forward, a memoir by Jules Pfeiffer, it says, "My children, my grandchild, my future grandchildren, success is nothing to sneeze at, but failure too offers great possibilities. And always remember, do not let your judges define you." And that's what the book is about, my work is about. It's as much about failure and failure as a process as it is about anything else, because it's that notion of failure that is so un-American and that we're so loath to deal with, because we like to think of ourselves as winners and making it and we're number one, numero uno, and over and over and over. And the notion that there can be this development, this process, not just till you're successful and it's over, but it's never over.
But also we're a fast food nation, and it's
Yes.
more expedient to get it right the first time. You know, to fail the first 8 times, 9 times at what you're trying. It's not sort of what we're built on. Built on doing it right, doing it quickly.
And what I've found, and it takes years to find this, and I say this that whenever I speak to groups of kids or young people, that the hardest thing in the world when you're young is the notion of doing something that you've just finished, which you know has a problem or two, but it's good enough. At a certain point, good enough is no longer good enough. And at a certain, it demands a certain level of maturity and self-knowledge to reach that point. I mean, I think you reach a point where not only do you know your failings, but you've learned also how to live with your failings and move on from them, and not simply be self-sabotage over and over again. I have no sense of direction, as I write about in my book. And when I'd get lost in the car, it used to throw me into a fury. And I'd spend a half an hour screaming at myself until I
Or
stopped.
anyone else in the car?
And in mid-fury one day I said, "Look, for the rest of my life I'm going to get lost, so stop screaming at yourself and just get used to it. And if you can't enjoy it, at least build enough time to get lost and find yourself, so there's no longer something that you can't deal with, because it's something that I am always going to have to deal with." I think there's too much encouragement in that way. I think you get out of the way. I think kids have natural gifts. I mean, if you go to Hallie, my middle child, and Julie went to PS 87, which was just a few blocks from where I lived, and and you see the kindergarten drawings on the wall, and the first grade on the wall, and the second grade, and as the grades go up, the drawings get less interesting, and less exciting and less thrilling. And when you see in kindergarten and first grade, you think everybody's an artist. This is wonderful stuff, incredible. And then it's not so anymore, and you wonder what happens. And part of the thing that happens is they get educated out of it. And part of it also happens that the kids get competitive with each other and start copying each other. So they educate themselves out of it and thus sabotage themselves. And what I've said over the years in interviews is it took me till I was almost 30 to get back to being as good as I was at 7. To cleanse yourself of all of the junk that's considered good advice or education or one thing and another that stops you from becoming the person you really are.
Yeah. And I think most children are going to find some sort of creative outlet that they are drawn to. For instance, my daughter loves baking and decorating cake. She's really talented at this and does beautiful jobs. I don't bake at all. I've never even tried to decorate a cake, but this is something that she's drawn to. So I think if you give them enough latitude, they'll be able to find, their own passions and to back off.
Well, but be there to
Okay, don't back
encourage,
off.
but not encourage them. That I encouraged. Katie was doing wonderful drawings and designs at some point, and I raved over them. And
Backfired.
I had a girlfriend at the time who was a painter, and she raved over them, so she stopped doing them entirely. Never went back, just stopped. And I've seen this with my other children, that at a point, your encouragement does the reverse of what it was meant to do. That they take that on as an obligation which they can't deal with.
There's suddenly too much pressure. It's too
Yeah.
loaded. It becomes something you need to achieve instead of something you're enjoying doing.